So are we live, Simon?
Are we live now?
Live. Cool. Well, welcome everybody. So welcome to those in person and welcome to those joining us at home to Live from the Archive. My name is Tom Ferber, and I'm an Engagement Learning Officer here at London Metropolitan Archives, and it's my very great pleasure in this series of events to spend a little bit of time with either a single item or a handful of items we have in our collection, and particularly those items featuring in our exhibition. And our current exhibition is called Magnificent Maps of London. It opened in May, so I can't really call it our new exhibition anymore, but our latest exhibition, and it runs through all the way to October. So if you are in a position to come through, if you are local enough to come and see us in person, you still have plenty of time to do so. And if you're not able to join us in person, there's various online resources we can point you to, so you can see this item and other items in our collection online. So as I say, our current exhibition is about maps, and we've reproduced sort of the tiniest sliver of the very large collection of maps we hold here at London Metropolitan Archives. Some of them we have taken advantage of sort of the latest digital technology to put them on the wall and blow them up so you can see them in a slightly new light. But other items, what we've done is we've brought them out in their original form, either displayed on the wall or in the cases. So it's a nice mix of the digital modern technology and the kind of archival unique artifacts that a place like this is obviously very well known for. And I'm very happy to say that one of the items that the single item that we're looking at today is very much in that unique category. So although there are other permutations and variations on this map, and we will go through some of them. This item that we see, this first printed edition of the exact survey, as it's known, is, as far as we know, unique. As far as we're aware, this is the only one in existence. So it's a real treasure to have, and it both gives us an insight into a very important and kind of pivotal moment in London history, but also interestingly it intersects quite nicely with a change in the way that London is depicted and a change in sort of preferences for how maps are produced as well. So we can think a little bit about that as well. So it is a map dated 1667 and entitled, it's quite a wordy title, so forgive me for reading this. An exact survey of the street, lanes and churches contained within the ruins of the city, and it's by John Leake and engraved by Wenceslas Holler. So fire, ruins, 1667. I think we can all guess what famous event that's linking back to. It is, of course, the Great Fire of London of 1666, which is one of those events that I must say I always think has a slightly curious how prominent a role it does play in our history. And because it does play such a prominent role, I probably don't need to spend too much time recounting the events of the Great Fire to you, so perhaps a recap will do. Indeed, if I prompted you, and I won't, you could probably do it for me. I reckon between the however many we are in the room and at home, we could probably kind of flesh out a pretty good account of the Great Fire. So we can sketch it quite briefly. It's the 2nd of September 1666 in Pudding Lane, just north of the River Thames in the City of London. The night of the 2nd of September, the baker's shop of one Thomas Farriner catches fire, probably, although he claims otherwise, from an oven that had not been properly extinguished, and from then a fire spreads very, very rapidly. There were both sort of geographical conditions in London that made the fire likely to spread, the building material, particularly the timber of which the houses were made, houses made very close together, sheer bad luck in that the baker's shop was located in lots of other flammable warehousing, and then kind of pulling back a level, it was a very hot and dry summer, so the fire risk was higher than it would otherwise be. And then by really sheer bad luck, there was a strong wind, and it was in the different direction from usual. So prevailing wind in London is confusingly called a westerly and blows to the east, and for this period it was an easterly wind, so blows from the east, and the direction of the wind and the strength of the wind spread the fire more quickly. In this kind of crowdsourced event, this crowdsourced version of the Great Fire of London, we might mention a complacent Lord Mayor. I'm reluctant to say what he said, but I will, particularly because we had an incident earlier with a hot mic and I was swearing already, so it's two swears in one talk, but you know, why not, we're all friends here. So the Lord Mayor, in a sort of a fit of complacency, used to fires in the City of London, said it was no small deal, and I quote, "a woman could piss it out." And of course, that wasn't the case because of the complacency and the conditions that we've heard about already. The fire quickly spreads. We have, I want to say, 3 days and 4 nights of an inferno that is hugely, hugely destructive. Again, you weren't expecting homework, so I won't test you, but if I give you some of the figures, they probably will be somewhat familiar. So we talk in terms of 100,000 houses destroyed, 87 parish churches, 44 the livery halls, so the trade guilds that were a really important part of the sort of the civic and commercial function of the city of this time. It's a church full of guild halls, St Paul's Cathedral, the Guildhall and the Royal Exchange. So huge part of both the kind of ecclesiastical, civic and mercantile infrastructure of the city destroyed. Miraculously, if we can say only when we're dealing with fatalities, recorded fatalities were only about 8, perhaps some more unrecorded, but considering the scale of the material damage, a blessedly few number of fatalities nonetheless. This fire changed the face of London. So historians will talk about this being the end of the medieval city, a city that had a medieval face now has a different look entirely. And the diarist, John Evelyn, simply said, London once and is no more. So a hugely apocalyptic event in London's history. And this is the event that the map records, but also it's going to record the other important part of the story, which is the rebuilding of the city of London. So that's a story that this map tells in part, and it's a story that is often told in maps as well. So indeed, even before the fire of 1666, there was a movement to rebuild the city. It had grown organically or haphazardly, depending on if you want a sort of positive or negative spin on it. So it was a haphazard, chaotic, crowded place, often kind of dirty and crowded with it as well. And so there were people that were kind of perhaps itching to rebuild, and indeed John Evelyn was one of those people. So when the fire happens, actually people had already had some ideas in mind about what would happen. Some people saw it as much as a kind of an opportunity as a disaster to rebuild. Of course, what we know now is that there was some change, some streets were widened, some buildings were rebuilt in brick, but the footprint of the city stays largely the same. And the reason behind that was to do with expediency, and the reason to do with that was to do with cost as well. So it would simply have taken too long to kind of clear all those property rights, to kind of rebuild something new, and the compensation required to buy people out of their property would have simply been too much. So we have this curious thing now in the City of London where it's an ultra-modern part of the country and the economy, but it has a somewhat medieval street plan. And then just incidentally, of course, those patterns of destruction and rebuilding did recur sort of 300 years odd later in the Second World War as well. So it survived these various waves of destruction. So that's the fire and the rebuilding. What of the map? So almost exaggerating slightly, as the embers were still burning, the map surveyors were kind of out and doing their trade. That was part, and we hear some really the luminary figures of sort of London history, intellectual and practical history. I mentioned in this story Christopher Wren, Robert Hooke, and others. And this idea of getting an important mathematical survey was hugely important. And so really, as I say, just weeks after the fire, an edict from the King goes out, King Charles II, to survey, and there's various surveys going on. It's a bit hard to untangle them, but this map is the product of a survey of a team of 6 surveyors led by one John Leake. I've not been able to unearth a huge amount about John Leake in the time I had to research this, but we do know he was a mathematician of kind of great repute and a mathematical lecturer as well. And he led a team of 6 surveyors, and we know that each of the 6 surveyors produced their own sheet, and these 6 sheets combined was the immediate post-fire survey. Those 6 sheets sadly do not survive. They were manuscript, which means they were sort of handmade and unique, so they don't survive. From those 6 sheets, another manuscript, so hand-drawn map was produced, and that on a single sheet, so reduced, that lives in the British Library, and that is the manuscript to which this printed map has been produced. So the process would be that a hand-drawn map would be transferred onto a copper printing plate, and from that multiple copies could be made. And although this map is unique, this first edition, I should say, the 67 first edition is unique. It's not because multiple copies weren't produced, it's because few have survived. So it would have been an important kind of working document that people would have used, and because of that, it's not survived. It wouldn't have survived the rough handling. You do see a 69 version as well, a 1669 version, and you can tell them apart quite easily by looking to which Lord Mayor it's dedicated to. So that's one way you can tell them apart. Considering the fragile nature of paper, and as we've heard about, this was a popular document in demand, it survived remarkably well. I comment I always make, I'd like to look this good in 350 years' time. But there are some signs of its age and some signs about how it's been treated. So it's been mounted on a board for the sake of display, and there's a permanent kind of paper backing on here as well. And on kind of closer examination. Oh, Simon, we should probably bring up the next slide, please, moment. So we're now going to have a nice closer look at the map. So hopefully those of you at home will now have the map on your screen as well there. And it should take, if it's not loaded up now, sometimes it just takes a minute to load up. So if it's not loaded up, just pop something in the chat and Simon will wave his magic wand and get that working for you. No pressure, my friend. So the map we can see, as I say, it's in very good condition, relatively speaking. There's some fraying around the edges, and if you have a look, you can also see that it's been stored folded at some point. So they are noticeable fold lines, and where those corners of the folds would have met, there is some kind of fraying, and you can see some spot repairs there as well. And slightly cringingly, it did make me cringe rather when I spot it, it has been stamped at some point by, I'm going to term a rogue archivist, probably early part of the 20th century. You can see a Harbin bequest stamp in purple ink on the top. We don't generally anymore stamp our unique maps with kind of purple blotches of ink, but you know, the past is a different country. They do things differently there. What's very interesting about this map, as well as its rarity, is how it combines different forms and different mapping elements together in one piece, and as I said in the introduction, therefore is a bit of a turning point when it comes to kind of how London was depicted. So what we can see strikingly, as we see it first of all, is in plan, or to use the technical mapping term, iconographic view, or iconographic view. So what we think of perhaps as a map view, straight from above, looking down in 2 dimensions, which has the virtue of accurately representing the geometry, so giving us accurate measurements between points, accurately representing the streets in 2 dimensions. And this is both for practical purposes, and obviously the stark white contrast with the built-up areas immediately conveys that damage of which we spoke at the beginning of the presentation as well. So that middle area is 2D, is a plan view, and then surrounding it is the area that survives, is the bird's eye view, the kind of perhaps the older and what we'll go slightly out of fashion version of London, which technically is called a choreographic view. For those of you who are aware of Civitas Londinium or the Agas map, you can think of that as the iconic choreographic or bird's eye view. And for those of us in the room today, you can have a look at the map over there on that corner as well. So the oldest maps of London are drawn in that choreographic view. The reasons that, one reason to do with that we have this this plan view is to do with expediency. It's quicker to do, and it's more accurate. And the big plans that we'll see, the big maps we'll see following the fire, are in this 2D view. And the bird's eye view starts to go out of fashion, because though it allows us to spend more time on the buildings, illustrating the buildings, we could say in some senses it's less accurate. So we have these 2 map views side by side. We also have a scale, as you would imagine, so a slightly curious scale of 17¼ inches to a mile on this map. The scale's in the corner there, and then there's a little sort of note in the corner which suggests there might have been an accompanying booklet that goes with this as well to provide more interpretation and evidence as well. In the top right-hand corner, there is a list of churches and livery companies that are destroyed. That's a numbered key which you can use to locate things on the map. And if you do look at the destroyed and burnt area in the map, you will see the livery halls also have a little sketches of their coats of arms where they were as well. That's another nice little visual touch. And then in the top left-hand corner, there is a panoramic. There's a panorama, so a view as if looking from the on the south bank of the Thames, looking north, and that depicts London shrouded in smoke. And have a look which way the smoke is blowing. It's blowing an easterly wind as well, quite prominently as well. So these various map elements are combined, and we've talked a bit about how it's sort of technically, historically interesting. We've talked a bit about how it tells this important chapter in London's history. It's also just worth mentioning, just for a minute before we take questions, a little bit about one of the other name associated with it, which is Wenceslas-Holler. So Wenceslas-Holler, if you're interested in views of London in the 17th century, is probably a name that's familiar to you. He was originally born in Prague and comes to London as a sort of a youngish man in the service of Thomas Arundel, who was a famous artistic patron before the English Civil War of the 1640s. And many of the most famous views of London you see in the 17th century are the work of Holler. He had a very long career and a huge amount of output in his career as well, and he's very much recognised as kind of a master of his field. So I think I alluded to it at the beginning. So this would have been called etching. So it's mechanically reproduced using copper printing plates. So a draftsman, a drawer, would produce a drawing, which then Holler, or an engraver more generally, would transfer onto the copper plates, and it can then be inked and it can be pressed, and you have the replicas. And Holler is, as I say, was renowned as a master of this view. But sadly, and this is in no way a unique story to Holler, lots of the map makers and people in this room didn't perhaps get the financial reward that we might hope that their talent and dedication would have commanded. And Holler dies in poverty, and in part, although not exclusively, that's because the great sort of project of his later years. So he was born in 1607, and he dies in 1677. Was something he termed his great map, and this was to be a choreographic, so the bird's eye view of London, that he started surveying in 1658. And his plan was to combine both the most beautiful illustrations of the choreographic style, but also with the most accurate ground plot he could produce in the iconographic style, so the plan style. And unfortunately, life is what happens when you're making plans. The Great Fire of London, of course, undid most of that work, and it seems like he wasn't, for either sort of emotional reasons or kind of financial reasons, never able to quite let that project go. So he tries to keep that project going as a memento, a memorial of the lost city, but it's not something that really ever captures people's pocketbooks, shall we say. So it never becomes financially viable. But you will see in compilations of maps at this time, Holler's great map. So that's something to be aware of as well. And we suspect that the 3D sections of this map, the bits of the map that survive the fire, are probably based on the drawings he did for that. So it's probably a reduced version of that, where some accuracy has been sacrificed for the sake of condensing it, and again for working quickly. So I hope that's sort of a nice place to perhaps to finish this presentation. Thank you for coming along in person. Thank you again for joining us at home. I'm very happy to take any questions people might have. Very happy to repeat anything if anything got lost as well, as can sometimes happen, particularly if we're streaming as well. So what I suggest is it's over to the people in person first of all, if you have any questions or comments, and then we can take questions from home, give people just a chance to wrap their fingers around the keyboard. It's a bit easier to talk than type. So there's no obligation, but if people do have any questions or comments, I'd be delighted to hear them and do my best to answer them. Yeah.
Well, excuse me,
No, not all of them, but a great...
Which ones are still remaining without being rebuilt?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. Simon, do you know?
There's a few.
There's a few.
Yeah.
Do you
Is
know?
it particularly you're interested into?
Well, I
Leicesters
know,
or?
not especially,
Mm.
but I know that things like Merchant Taylor Skinners and all of those,
Yeah.
whether they were, because I haven't seen
Yeah, I think...
them, yes,
I-
whether they were destroyed and then...
I've not got the ones that survived inside off the top of my head, and I'm annoyingly drawing a blank, which is weird because between myself and actually my colleague Simon, who's off camera, we've spent quite a lot of time in livery halls over the years, as you might expect. But I'm going to do my cop-out answer, which is when I'm not sure, I can tell you where to find out, and handily, it's right here. So I can't think of any kind of clear examples of that one survived and it's now the most prestigious. But if anyone here knows, or in the chat knows, if they're a livery member, perhaps they can let us know. That's very good. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Sorry not to give you a fuller answer. Other questions or comments in the room? And do you have any questions or comments from home, Simon?
Yeah, just putting the livery calls as surviving bed by
Yeah. So we'll give people another minute at home just in case they want to ask anything. Or if anyone would just like me to kind of repeat or clarify anything as well, I'm happy to do that as well. Yeah.
How difficult is it to, the map that's behind you, to
Yeah.
reproduce something at that size and put that together? How long does that take?
Yeah, good question. So just for the benefit of the people at home, so there was a question, I think, more generally about the exhibition. How long does it take to reproduce a map like this digitally? So in terms of the physical printing isn't too big a deal because it's something we do a lot of and it's kind of there. But you've kind of got to work back in stages. So with something like this, there's at least kind of two levels of challenge. The first is making sure that it's been well digitized, so well photographed. And as you might expect, we have a specialist photography suite downstairs with very high resolution cameras and all the sort of appropriate cradles and the like to make sure that rare documents are are kind of properly held and not damaged in the process of digitization. And then with this map, we took the decision to join the sheets. The sheets are joined as they would be if you laid the map out in real life. And so what you will see is you'll see some kind of blurs on the edges, and that really is the hard bit with something like that, kind of getting them properly lined up and resolved. I think this exhibition took, in terms of the mapping and things like that, it took us about 6 months to put it together in that regard. But obviously it's one of those things where 6 months with the right technology and people that do this sort of thing a lot of the time. So that was the challenge with that. Interestingly, you'll also sometimes see maps that are reproduced digitally being what's called geo-rectified, and that's when an older map has been basically laid on top of a modern sort of GPS, usually GPS-derived map, and then it's you match points from the new map to the old map, and what that lets you do is compare with an old street plan to a new street plan with greater geographical accuracy. So you see that as well. But we took the decision for all the maps in this to present them as they were, but just join together on the seams. Thank you. Any questions from home, Simon? Wonderful. In which case, unless there are any more questions, and I should say as well, if you have questions and you prefer not to do it like this, I'll be hanging around afterwards, and if you want to just ask me kind of one-to-one, that's fine too, of course. But if there are no more questions here or at home, it just beholds me to say thank you again for coming along, either in person or virtually. It's always a great pleasure to research these items like this, and an even greater pleasure to share it with yourself. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.